Hello and welcome to Current Affairs on JTV, the global Jewish channel. I'm here today with Bill Kristol, who's the founder and editor of the Weekly Standard and a leading conservative commentator in Washington, D.C. Bill, thank you very much for joining us today.
Good to be with you, Alan.
Great. I'm going to jump straight into it. You're not a big fan of Donald Trump, are you?
I'm not. I think he's a demagogue, authoritarian populist. Who knows if he even believes in anything, but he's exploiting some pretty unpleasant sentiments and is not a real conservative and is just a cut below in terms of character and judgment. I think any major party nominee we've had for president in either party for a long time, maybe ever, although I hate to say that since I don't really know, early 19th century American history, I suppose, as well as I might, but no, so I do not think Donald Trump should be president of the United States.
And you think that sufficiently that for the first time, I'm presuming, you're not going to vote for the Republican candidate?
Yes, I wrote that I've written. I think I did the math, in 11 straight presidential elections for the Republican nominee, and I really don't regret those votes. Some of them were better than others. Some of them won, some of them lost, but I generally think on the big issues of the day, especially on foreign policy, during the Cold War and then after 1989 or 1991, during even the interregnum, so to speak, and then after 9/11, Republicans have generally been sounder, and certainly the Republican presidential nominees have been sounder than the Democrats in almost every case. And now we have a Republican presidential nominee who has no serious views, no serious knowledge of foreign policy, but whose instincts are pretty terrible. Pro-Putin, cavalier about the threats that are out there, believes he can negotiate deals in some facile way with authoritarian leaders, totally irresponsible on trade. So it's very unfortunate. On foreign policy alone, one almost has to say that Hillary Clinton, who I don't have a very high regard for at all, and who was a failed Secretary of State in a failed Obama administration, in my view, and really presided over pretty disastrous decisions in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere, the reset for Putin. But you reckon she's got the on foreign policy? I hate to say it, but
she's got the whip hand on him there. But does that mean you're going to vote for Hillary? Is that what you're saying?
No, I haven't given up on recruiting a third candidate. We have a pretty strong two-party system in America, as you do. But these are kind of extraordinary times. We never really had a nominee like Trump. I mean, I don't mean that in a judgmental way, even just analytically. We haven't had someone in 60 plus years who hadn't had elective office. And of course, Eisenhower was in 52. That was a somewhat different situation. We haven't had this kind of authoritarian populist demagogue. Whenever one thinks of the Obamas and McCains and Clintons and Carters even, and Nixons of the world, they weren't like this. So on domestic policy issues, I imagine a Trump administration might be closer to where I'd like to be just because it would be a Republican than a Clinton administration. I do think Clinton would be very bad in just further expanding the nanny state, kind of a Europeanization or EU-ization, if that's a word, of America. On foreign policy, she would be at best mediocre and sort of would preside, I'm afraid, over continued decline and chaos around the world. But he could really be catastrophic. So it's really a terrible choice. I hope we can get a reasonable person to run as an independent Republican candidate. I think that person would have an outside chance of winning and a real chance to make a contribution by at least holding aloft the standard of to which many of us would like to repair.
Well, okay, I take your point that Hillary Clinton's not going to be a great candidate, but how bad exactly do you think Trump could be? I mean, let's be honest, Congress is going to be able to restrain him on much of what he has said. How bad is he going to be? Or could he be?
No, look, it's a good question, and I mean, I have good friends here, I should hasten to add, who have made the calculation in good faith and in a serious way that, Trump within the envelope, so to speak, of the Republican Party won't be so terrible. He might have decent advisors. He'll be constrained by Congress, as you say. I think on domestic policy, he would be constrained by Congress to a large degree. I think I should say I think he's unlikely to beat Hillary Clinton. But if he were to win, he would be constrained on domestic policy. But in foreign policy, the commander-in-chief has an awful lot of leeway, as we have seen. Congress tried to constrain. A majority of Congress was against the Iran deal. They couldn't stop President Obama. I think a majority of Congress did resist in certain ways the pullout from Iraq, the precipitate pullout from Iraq. There were efforts to intervene and get the president to intervene in Syria. None of that mattered when he chose to get out of Iraq and not intervene in Syria. So I do think of Donald Trump, the cavalier attitude he has towards our alliances. I was speaking with an Asian diplomat the other day who said, look, we're going to have to be serious about, possibly as an ally, about finding our own way, cutting our own deals with China conceivably, or developing nuclear weapons as a check on China. We just think the fundamental American commitment that is so undergirded peace and security and freedom to the degree that it remains, and it's not as strong as it once was, around the world, it's still fundamental, obviously. And I do think that gets called into question by Trump in a way that's very unusual, really. I mean, that's not the custom in American politics. Whatever one thinks of these different presidents, there's been a basic commitment to American leadership. I think that's wobbled quite a lot under Obama. Trump is a reaction to Obama, and an understandable one by a lot of frustrated voters in America.
But he's gone a very different way.
Sometimes the reaction could be worse than the original cause, you know.
No, I can see that. Of course, he's gone a very different way. Now, you did mention your Republican friends who have gone a different way and have made the calculation. Some Republicans think you've made a very bad choice. You were called recently a renegade Jew, for example, in the Breitbart news site. Were you surprised by the ferocity of the attacks?
Look, one thing that's happened in recent years, and I've probably minimized it myself because I just tend to ignore such, stuff, is a kind of resurgence of, well, a really mean-spirited politics, some anti-Semitism, some racial bigotry and other forms of bigotry. It's happened on both sides, I've got to say. I think it did start perhaps a little more on the left, but as unfortunately the reaction to it that's been unleashed on the right is not extremely, but quite ugly too. The person who wrote that was a sort of eccentric conservative polemicist, and he thought he was being amusing, I suppose. I don't think he's an anti-Semite, but when you use a phrase like renegade Jew, it then gets picked up by everyone in a very ugly way. So I got to say I'm more alarmed about the general state of American politics and American political culture than I was 3 or 4 or 5 months ago. I remember talking with a young person who said, it was a she actually. She's very active on Twitter, and she was seeing and she makes the mistake of looking at what other people say in response to her or about her, and so she was kind of alarmed. And I said, "Oh, come on, that's a few thousand people. It's a huge country, 330 million. This is just tiny. It's always been there, obviously on the fringes of both sides of the political aisle." But I now think she was right to be somewhat alarmed, and I'm personally somewhat alarmed. The general level of discourse, the personal insults, again, whatever you think of the Obamas and Nixons and Clintons, people ran tough campaigns in the past, tough ideological campaigns, but the kind of belittling of individual opponents that Trump has engaged in, I don't think we've really seen that. So it's not a happy moment for American politics.
Well, it's not a happy moment. It's doubtless going to get worse. I mean, I think one of the features of the primary campaign on the Republican side was, as you say, the belittling of individuals, the petty jibes, the way these came to the fore. But that's only going to get worse, given that in the case of Mrs. Clinton, Donald Trump has got 30 years worth of material to work on here.
Yeah, and I was on TV just last night and with a Clinton spokesman and a Trump spokesman, and all I said was, this is just depressing listening to these two. It's going to be, as you say, a terrible 5 months. It's why, again, I think a Mitt Romney or a younger person who could just say, who would just appear as a serious, responsible person, maybe not super charismatic, maybe with some limitations, but still, I think would be such a refreshing alternative for voters to have, and might really hit a chord. That person could get in the debates. You'd have a three-way debate. I don't know, anything could happen, because I think there will be a lot. I've got to think at some point people get tired of Trump. At some point, not at some point, right now, even people are tired of Clinton. We've never had two major party nominees with these kind of unfavorable ratings. So I really do think there's a chance, and I hope there is a third party, if only to provide an alternative so people can look up, young people especially, and see, that this is not simply what American politics has come to, a choice of Clinton and Trump. It's really pretty appalling.
You mentioned some names, obviously, in who might be potential third-party candidates, but let's assume none of them come about. Would you consider standing?
Yeah, that would be interesting. I can't say that seems very likely or possible.
Well, as a last resort, you said it's necessary. Why wouldn't you
Yeah,
stand?
well, I mean, if someone comes to me and says they'll help put together a campaign and raise some money and get me on at least enough ballots to make it not simply a quixotic, I guess I'd be open to it. I'd have a whole bunch of other people whose names who I think are more appropriate for this kind of thing, more suited, more talented to it than I, including other, journalists and commentators and other people. But look, I do think it would be good to give people a choice.
Well, okay, let's quickly move to the broader point. You mentioned that Barack Obama, his presidency has hardly been a foreign policy success in terms of how that's worked. One of the key criticisms of the Obama administration's policy has been the Middle East, which is an area I know, of course, you know much about. It's said that the Obama administration has consciously downgraded Israel in return for a very uneasy alliance with Iran in that sense. What do you think has gone on in that administration for the last 8 years, and is that a correct analysis of the situation?
Yeah, not just downgrading Israel, but downgrading our traditional Sunni Arab allies. Yes, I think it is correct. I think Ben Rhodes, who's close to one of the senior people at the National Security Council, has pretty much confirmed this in various interviews, and President Obama pretty much confirmed it in a discussion about a month or two ago. Lee Smith has been writing this, as you know, a lot in our magazine, and 3-4 years ago, people said, "Oh, you're way out there. You look almost conspiratorial," and saying that they really want Iran to be stronger, but they pretty much said that. I think the disaster in the Middle East, the withdrawal from Iraq, the failure to intervene in Syria, the signals about the coddling of Iran, I mean, have just been disastrous. In a way, Israel's it's also been a foolish policy, but it's probably been the least damaging of the other in the general cocktail of Middle East policies, which have had such a damaging effect on our credibility and on people's sense that we are at all a reliable ally. And I was struck, I was in Japan a couple of years ago. I don't know very little about East Asian policy. I hadn't been there in 20 years. I was with a group of think tankers and magazine editor types, and we met with the Prime Minister. And I've told this story before, I think I'm not violating any confidences. He asked me about Syria. He asked what's going on, and I sort of said, well, why? I mean, I of course talked with him about it, but then I said, well, respect, Mr. Prime Minister, why are you asking me about some part of the world that's so far away from East Asia where there's so much to talk about? He said, well, what happens, of course, in one part of the world affects perceptions elsewhere, especially for you, for the United States, the global superpower. And he said, don't underestimate how much damage is done here to the perception of American reliability and strength if you look weak elsewhere. And that's what most alarms me. People just do not appreciate, you've written about this, Alan, people do not appreciate how quickly everything can come unraveled. And I think we're at getting maybe close to a tipping point in that respect. And that's why it's particularly alarming to have this presidential choice at a time when we need not just sort of routinely competent management, but an actual, reassertion of leadership and strength on the part of the U.S.
So we have a picture of a weakening America, two candidates who won't restore the balance, the unlikely possibility a third candidate will win. So come next January, what can America's allies and America's enemies expect from the situation, and what do you expect to happen over the coming 4 years, given the generally dismal outlook that you've painted?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little dismal. I would say there have been times, though, when people have been surprisingly good presidents and have reversed themselves. And this is where maybe Trump can see such a wild card. Who knows, I suppose. And, Hillary Clinton, I think, tries to be serious about foreign policy. I think she would have been better than President Obama, actually, a little more traditional, at least, in her kind of caring about alliances. And maybe she's learned a lesson from the failed Russia reset. Maybe she's learned a lesson from what's happened in Iraq and Syria. Her people put out that she wasn't really in favor of doing nothing in Syria, for example. Maybe she's learned a lesson from the abandonment of Libya after the initial intervention, which she was such a champion of. Maybe she's learned a lesson that we need stronger, better defense capabilities and so forth. So I'm open to the view that, again, I don't think it'll quite be the degree of strength and leadership that I would like, the kind of U-turn that I would like in American foreign policy. But I do think it's possible that Hillary Clinton would be adequate, or at least minimally adequate, and maybe even better if she kind of learned a lesson from this mugging by reality that you would think liberals should have seen over the last 8 years. Trump is just a much wilder question and more unpredictable. It's not inconceivable, of course, that he could do the right thing and that his kind of populist authoritarian strength could be shaped into a more responsible form of American leadership.
And final question on this. Let's look at the Middle East sort of writ large. Can you see a solution in the next 4 years, next presidency, to the Syria crisis, firstly? Can you see a solution to Israel's problems with the Palestinians? And finally, can you see a way to stop Iran's growing hegemony in the region?
I don't know, honestly. I'm not sure I really see. I mean, events change, things happen internally. Sometimes you get lucky with developments in the Palestinian Authority or in Iran. And I would say one thing, since you mentioned Israel, I'm thinking about speaking here with you and in Great Britain. I think our allies could play a role. I mean, whoever's president's president, but you know what David Cameron, if he's prime minister, or his successor, what Benjamin Netanyahu, what others say to them can make a difference. Obviously, the U.S. is sort of unique, and it's hard to ask others to lead the U.S. I think they could push the U.S. In Obama's case, there's been an aversion to our strongest allies, as you mentioned, with Israel. I think you could make some of the same case with Britain and others. Harper, when he was Prime Minister of Canada. I think with Trump and with Clinton, maybe start over again with and a chance at least to influence them in the right direction. Maybe some of the loving countries around the world, America, understand the importance of restoring our leadership commitment to peace and security and freedom around the world.
Well, Bill, thank you. That's all we've got time for today. Thank you for joining us, and thank you all at home. We'll see you again for another episode of Current Affairs on JTV. Thank you.